Hello and welcome to Love and Flowers and You. Today we're talking divorce. You've actually written a book about it. So Jennifer, start off with you. What is your advice? I hear so many, my friends are going through divorce. Divorces has been a constant topic for decades for me. Tell us what kind of good advice we can give to people since you've done so much research on it.
I did write a book on divorce and breakups in general. And just to clarify, it is unpublished because the publishers want 100,000 social media followers before they'll touch your book. So I do have tons of information on this that's just sitting waiting to go, but will be on hold for a while. The big thing for me when I was writing the book, it was actually quite triggering. I had my own divorce experience. I think the three of us were talking in one of our recent episodes about how all three of us are actually divorced. And writing out my story at the beginning of this book, I actually was having nightmares. It was horrible. And I had to come up with all these rules for myself. Like I couldn't write, like once the sun went down, it was done. Because it was just bringing all this stuff up late in the night and I couldn't relax. And it was just really, divorce and breakups in general are horrible. And they're just really, I felt like a failure. I felt anxious. I felt fearful about the future. And there's, for every different person, you're going to have like a myriad of emotions going through. And the unfortunate thing and the fortunate thing that happened for me about 6 months after my separation is I had a high school reunion. It's the worst timing ever. It's come and bring your significant other. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. I'm going to show up alone. And my best friend was super pregnant and couldn't travel to go. So I had to go alone. And it was just this horrifying experience. But when I showed up, I was chatting with one of my girlfriends that I've known literally since kindergarten. And we'd been out of touch for a while and we reconnected at this reunion, but we were in brownies together and Girl Scouts together and our, families knew each other and 4 years old, that's just a long time to know someone. But she said something to me when I shared just a little bit about what I was going through. And even at that point, I didn't even know all the horrors that would come out in this lengthy process. She said to me, Jenny, and she calls me Jenny because she knew me at 4. Don't call me Jenny. No, I'm just kidding. She's like, Jenny, I'm actually so excited for you. And I just stared at her like she was a crazy person. And she said, you get to have a renaissance. Anything you want in your life, you get to do. And those words that Allie spoke to me just hit me like a ton of bricks. And she caused that day a shift in my thinking from one of fear about the future and pessimism to one of creativity. It really kind of shifted me from fear to curiosity about what my future could hold, and took me from a place of feeling kind of, victim isn't the right word, but kind of feeling of, we feel sometimes a victim of our circumstances or held captive by our circumstances, and gave me a sense of power and optimism that I could create something for my future. So it was that conversation that actually inspired one of the chapters in my book that's called The Renaissance. And so I came up with these, for the book, these, 10 steps, because editors love these like magic numbers of things. And Michelle and I have been talking about back and forth about the different tips that we have and everything. But that's how that whole thing was born, was this discussion at the most horrible time of my life with a childhood friend.
But what advice can we give women? Because it's like even what you said, Michelle, you said something about how, you can be positive about it, but it's hard to start in a positive mode when you feel like your life is crashing around you. And I have this girlfriend that, I'm trying to help through it. And I think back to my circumstance, and I just remember I just kind of plodded forward, but it was hard to come up for air and say, okay, I'm going to be positive now. It was just kind of like one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. And so I'm just kind of trying to find what advice, because it is like a slap in the face for women, and it's a shock, and it's, how do you, what advice do you give to women that come into your office and say, I just don't know what to do. I'm getting divorced, and I feel my life is coming apart.
A lot of times for me, I will tell, I've had this conversation multiple times about, I know that it seems really dark right now and really hopeless, and maybe like you're a victim of your circumstances, but keep going forward. Like you said, plodding along, but not even plodding along, just taking it one day at a time. I think that's really important. Then Jennifer touched on something that is also really important. When I was going through my divorce, and I guess mine was not really a surprise to me, because I had spent the better part of 3 years sort of thinking about it, getting in the best physical, emotional, and spiritual shape of my life to make sure that I was making a clear decision. And even though I thought I was sort of ready for it, I was still shocked by how painful it was. Like, I cried probably every day for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I was raising 3 kids at that time and still doing a pretty good job as their mother. But I think I look back at that time and I'm like, whoa, that was really a one day at a time period for me.
It is. And I was the same way. I would cry in the car on the way to work. I'd see patients all day, and then I would get back in the car and cry all the way home. It was just one of those things where thankfully I was able to dive into my work and practice mindfulness and be in the lives of other people while I was there. But in my own time, it's really can be devastating. I think there's 2 important things to start with of all of kind of these 10 steps that you can do. There's more, I'm sure. But I think there's 2 key things that are essential to do at the beginning. And one is taking control of your finances. Because for most people who divorce, money is an issue. And at the beginning stages, you haven't figured out, is there going to be spousal support? Is there going to be child support? Are we going to sell the house? Do we get separate apartments? Like, what is it going to be? There's a lot of financial instability. It's hard to plan. And so coming up with a budget and sticking with it and making those decisions early on. Can we afford to keep the kids in private school? How do we simplify our lives? Because each person, especially when there's kids involved, will now be a single parent and in charge of their own household. And so I think that getting the finances and being realistic about the lifestyle you can afford, so I'm going to have attorney's fees and this and that. So for the next year, what is my lifestyle going to be? And planning for that is really helpful to do at the beginning. The second thing I thought was really key for myself was really starting to banish all the bad memories, because I was triggered by everything. So I separated in December. So what's in December? You have a Christmas tree with all your Christmas ornaments. And I can't tell you how many times I sat with patients who actually, in that year, their first Christmas, and they're divorced, and they take out all their Christmas ornaments, and it's just this, they come in my office and they're just heaving with tears, because every ornament they pull out is a reminder of some happy experience, a family vacation, the kids' first this and that, and it's really traumatic. So, but looking around the house, like I had to kind of clean. And, it's like spring cleaning. I had to get rid of anything that triggered negative memories and make the space that I was in feel like my space. I did the same thing with my social media. And I didn't like having to do that. I got rid of mutual friends that I knew were kind of be in touch with my ex, and family members and of my in-laws and things. And I wasn't pushing them out of my life for any reason at all. But for me, I didn't want to get on Facebook where I connect with my old friends from childhood and, joke around with my friends, and then have a post by my now soon to be ex-sister-in-law and just kind of go through the roof and be set apart in tears. I had to create zones of safety for myself. And so those were probably the 2 most important things that I did early on.
But I want to also share, when you talk about that, it makes me think of actually my ex-sister-in-law is still one of my best friends. And so I want to give hope to women that are facing divorce, that there is this huge light, and kind of talking about your renaissance, Jennifer, there is this huge light at the end of the tunnel. While everything does seem dark, that you can get over this huge hump, this huge PTSD moment, and things do get better. Michelle, you're shaking your head. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, things that might have to change while you're going through this process can come back. In my own experience, the thing that shocked me the most was my family's reaction. I got married the first time when I was just a little over 22 years old, and my parents are high school sweethearts, and I can actually remember in high school thinking about, well, who am I going to marry? You know, at like 16 or 17 years old, gosh, I don't have somebody that I think I can marry yet. And feeling like really behind. And you know me well enough now to know that I don't like to feel behind. So I got right on it. And it was, you know, talk about a renaissance. This is an interesting thing too, how to trust that the people who are going to be there will be there. You know, I really, really believe that having faith that if your family is upset with you or if your friends are upset with you, there are going to be still the people who you need will be right in front of you. And actually, it was a friend of my sister's who knew how poorly my sister was taking the whole thing, which made sense because, you know, she's almost 12 years younger than me. And my first husband was like her big brother. And she was 5 when we started dating, and we were getting divorced right after she had gotten married. So she took it really hard, and that made sense. But it was one of her friends who gave me a book called Broken Open by Elizabeth Lesser. And it is this whole theme of you're broken right now, but you can choose to be broken open. And, you know, like a cocoon is broken open and a butterfly emerges. So that was really, you know, that book was there for me right when I needed it to be there for me. And I really approached the whole experience that way.
I love that. I've read that book and I love it. But I'm curious, Jennifer, more of the steps from your research.
Well, something that Michelle was saying is actually one of the steps, and it has to do with building a tribe. And, you know, we have these fears, and I had those same fears that, you know, what is my mom going to think, or what are my friends going to think, and who's going to support me and who isn't. But I'm a firm believer that every woman needs a tribe, and men do too. They need like a circle of friends who feel like brothers to them. And I talk to my patients about this all the time. And I was fortunate enough that when I first separated, I had a fabulous tribe all around me of girlfriends. I had 4 or 5 really solid girlfriends, but they started moving away one by one. And I was tasked with having to rebuild my tribe in a time of life when I felt really vulnerable. And so there's a lot that we can actually do to find what I call sister girlfriends. They're kind of like sister wives, but not creepy. But, you know, how do you find them? And part of that is, you know, you have to make these lifestyle changes when you separate, and you actually have to get out of your rut, and you have to start doing new things. And so I think it's important to think back to a time in life when you're happy. What are the things you're doing that contribute to your happiness? And so I went back and to get in touch with like young Jenny, and what did she like, and who was she before she got on this relationship that kind of took me down this path that was not where I wanted to be at that stage in my life. And, you know, for me, I started painting again. I'm a horrible painter, but my mom paints. And so it is totally true. But it gave us something to talk about that was not divorce related. Right? And I would then go to museums, and I would look at sculptures and paintings and see all these colors and textures. And it did something to my mind that the divorce couldn't. It was just a complete escape. So whether you were happy as a student, find a book club, or find like a chess club, or, you know, take dance classes, or, you know, whatever it is that brings you joy, golfing, or finding like a sports league. And then you can meet people that way, but you're also kind of switching things around and getting this sense of new beginnings.
And Michelle, do you have other steps and advice for the women that come into your office? Because they must be coming in just distraught.
Yeah, very much so. And it's interesting to hear Jennifer say that she started painting, because a huge part of my process was rediscovering creativity, and I was probably always had that creativity inside of me, but it always got pushed aside for the business, of getting good grades. And, I never took an art class in high school. And looking back now, it blows my mind, because if I went back to high school, I would love to have taken an art class or something like that. So I really found creativity, and I think it's partly what has brought you joy in the past, and also who do you want to become? And keeping that in mind and going through the process intentionally is really important. The other thing that I think, as I've seen people go through divorces, one thing to remember is that divorce, and it's different a little bit if you have children together or if you're going to have an ongoing relationship, but it's not a thing. It's not a thing you go through. It's a thing you go through every time you pull out your Christmas ornaments, or it's a thing you go through at every one of your child's milestones after this. It's not something that just happens to you and then you're over it. It's something that you take on for the rest of your life, and sort of keeping that in perspective, that you have time to perfect this, but also you want to be careful about how much destruction you're doing in that moment. I have worked with several people whose divorces have cost them over $1 million because the fighting was so intense. And I'm like, okay, but there's still a lot of energy in that relationship. And what are you doing? You're going to have to keep working with this person. And all this money that you're spending right now on your attorneys, of course, I'm the psychiatrist, right? I'm like, I will charge you a fraction of that and we'll be getting better instead of worse.
But sometimes it's not the option. The story I've heard and I'm familiar with at the moment with my friend is that, her husband is just this person she did not know, who's been spending money she had no idea. She thinks she's going to lose her house and go into bankruptcy, and it's so much out of her control. You kind of need the lawyers to hold on to whatever you can hold on to after a couple of decades of marriage. So sometimes that part of it may not be in your control, because in fact with my divorce I actually did it with very little legal help, but it depends on your partner and it depends on the situation.
Well, you probably have to give your friend my number, because
yeah.
my situation was very similar. And I woke up one day to find my ex had put us into a huge amount of debt without my knowledge, with credit cards I knew nothing about. And I had to start my entire life over again in my late 30s from scratch. And, but the thing that was important, the lesson I had to learn, was to know, have realistic expectations. So for me, I wanted to go to court and I wanted the judge to yell at him. I wanted what was fair to happen. But in California, family court isn't about justice. It's just about divorcing the most number of people you can in the easiest way. And we are a no-fault state. So the law doesn't care who did what. It doesn't matter in my state. And so for me, going to court was simply about interpretation of the law, not who did what. And so when you go into court with the expectation that your emotions are somehow going to be justified or reinforced, or your ex is going to be punished or something, you will never feel satisfied. You will kind of maintain this sense of desperation. And you have to work with an attorney who will give you a very realistic expectation of, in your state, what is going to happen with this process. Are you going to get support? I had to pay support. So I woke up to all the debt and then, had to figure out, well, how are we going to pay off all this debt? And then he sued me for spousal support because I made more money than he did. And in a no-fault state, I had to pay. For years, I was balancing paying my ex and paying off all this debt. And if my happiness was predicated on having justice fulfilled by the court, then that's just a recipe for perpetual unhappiness. So knowing what to expect is extraordinarily important.
And how do you let go? I mean, that sounds so phenomenally frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
How do you let go and kind of focus on the positive in life? Michelle, do you want to take
Oh, I was totally looking forward to hearing Jennifer say, how did you do it, Jennifer? What did you do?
Well, so every person's story is different. So we're each going to react to the same situation differently. And for me, with my background, and I talk about this in the book, I was particularly triggered. Like most people, when they hear my story, become just as enraged as I was, except not as enraged as I was because they didn't have my background. And my background was, when I was very young, my dad left and cleared out the house. So when my husband left and I found out everything was cleared out, my brain had a really traumatic experience because it was replicating an early childhood trauma. So my responses were actually exaggerated. I've said it before on this podcast, one of my favorite sayings, and I wish I had known it at the time I was going through my divorce, and I didn't. But if it's hysterical, it's historical. And so my response was so exaggerated during the time of my divorce because it wasn't just about the injustice of the current situation. It was also about the injustice that this little child had when she came home one day and the house is empty. And so how we respond is going to really, or how we feel in that moment, it has a lot to do with our past experiences. So for me, once I made that connection, I went, okay, I need to get in touch with a really good therapist who's a smart colleague. And I found someone actually with 2 PhDs. Like I need to find someone smarter than me because I needed to process for the first time in my life this thing that had happened when I was a kid. It had never come up before. Now, not everyone going through divorce is going to need therapy or help to go through. For me, it was helpful because it triggered this past thing. I think anyone who's going through a breakup, who has an exaggerated stress response, who then can recognize this is actually rooted in something that's happened in the past, can benefit from working with someone on that.
Okay, Michelle, you're going to have to wrap it up because we're running out of time.
Okay, so the last thing I would say is, you said that everyone doesn't need therapy when they're going through divorce or a breakup. And my recommendation would be that everyone sought out somebody to, at least for 5 to 8 sessions, go in and talk about what's going on. Because just like you, I had a repeating pattern, and probably Marina had the same thing. And how many of the people that we see, actually, it was like, here was the first time you could have resolved this trauma, and then it showed up again, this same trauma for you to resolve, only this time it's 10 times more painful.
Well, I will say this, when I'm working with couples or people who are like at the beginning stages, I will often say, look, who you are and how you feel, what's going on in your brain, you take with you with the divorce.
Yes.
When the two of you separate, it's not like the bad parts of your brain go with your ex. It stays with you. And so there are marriage family therapists who can work with couples on how to get through divorce, or work with people individually. How am I going to co-parent? How am I, going to not let my kids see my stress? What are my survival skills? So it can be really helpful to remember that your problems don't leave when your partner leaves. They're your problems.
Yeah. And another thing that doesn't leave is the positive stuff, because the relationship was 50% you and 50% him. So if he leaves, his 50% may have been negative, because sometimes I say when you get married, you inherit a whole bunch of problems. So you have to remember a lot of the fun, a lot of the great in your life is still there because you're still there. Michelle, you're shaking your head on that.
I'm shaking my head. I mean, and I came out of a situation where this was someone that I started dating when I was a child still. And, because I had to get it done, but we had 3 children together, and we had a lot of phenomenal memories and times that we created. And I didn't think it would be fair to my children to just erase that whole past.
Absolutely.
So I had to get to a place where I didn't need to do that.
Well, this is such a huge topic. It's really hard to take it in just one show. So we may revisit it in the future. But for now, I want to thank you, terrific doctors, for sharing your information. I think people don't know how lucky they are to have access to all your greatness. And invite everyone to join us for our next episode of Love and Flowers and You.
And if you have any questions on this topic or others you want answers or possible solutions for, email us at loveandflowersandYou@gmail.com. So it is all spelled out. Love, Love, and AND, flowers, and you at gmail.com. loveandflowersandYou@gmail.com. That's the email. And please don't forget to subscribe and download the podcast so you don't miss out on any of this life-transforming information. Tune in to our next episode as Michelle and Jennifer continue guiding you to discover your own light and give you the tools on your path to a more fulfilling life.